Well,
Should we begin?
Carolyn,
All
yeah,
right.
let
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 me
me introduce you.
okay.
So I'm Dr. David Meyer, and I'm Carolyn's research advisor, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here to her doctoral dissertation defense. And now, how this will work is that there'll be a public portion for the first 40 minutes or so where she will speak to us, and then the floor will be opened up to questions from the public. And then we will dismiss all of you good people, and Carolyn will meet with just her committee. But if you would do me a favor and make sure that your mics are all on mute, and if you have any questions, please save them until you hear Carolyn say thank you and you see her reference slides, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. But please don't interrupt her until that point has been reached. Any questions before we let her begin? All right, hearing none, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Carolyn Sebron.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending my defense of my dissertation. It's a wonderful evening in July. And I really appreciate everyone who has taken the time out of their day to come and share this experience with me. And so before we get started, I just want to do a dedication. This is for my parents, Calvin and Glenna Sebron. We say Sebron in Ohio, and for the ancestors. And when I say ancestors, I'm speaking of not just my blood kin, but my musical ancestors as well, of which there are many. And just a few acknowledgements. My thanks to Dr. Meyer, my dissertation advisor, my dissertation committee, Dr. Leonard, Dr. Smith, Dr. Standifer, as well as the Shenandoah University faculty and administration for allowing me to continue this research in an extended time period. As a non-traditional student, I am forever humbled and grateful. My heartfelt appreciation to my participants who allowed me to hear their stories, sit in their spaces, and share their experiences as singers, as human beings, and as sisters and brothers on the artistic path. May your journey continue. To those friends and colleagues, I cannot name everyone, but many thanks to Dr. Barbara DeMaio, who pointed the way to Shenandoah, for Willie Morales, who told me I could, and Dr. Leslie B. Dunner, who told me I must. To Dr. Kathleen, Blessed Saint of Winchester Bell, and Dr. Jessica, Lady Jessica Foy Long, who befriended and helped me navigate through the corridors of academia. They had to explain to me what Blackboard was. I'd been out of school so long. And even though distant, I hold you close in my heart. For Kathleen Schmeda, who helped me prepare for my comprehensive examinations, and then along with Robin Pringle, who read, corrected, questioned, and pushed me through this writing process. Grazie, grazie, voi siete angeli, your angels. And a special acknowledgement to Dean Cynthia Bryan, Assistant Dean Cobb, and Interim Department Chair, Dr. Judy James at Southern University A&M College for their support and encouragement over the past 2 years. So let's see, my keyboard is not working, so let's see if we can go here and do it that way. There we go. There's been a lot of research in recent years, even 10, 15 years, about the benefit of music and singing for older people. And the conclusion is that older people can benefit from singing. And so this study is going to be in part about that. And the problem would be, so if it does benefit them, or people stop singing, or they're not able to sing, there's a benefit that's lost. Cohen speaks to this, Soleil and Grau Sanchez speak to this as well. So the population affected, elders, when we talk about older people, there are all kinds of words, elderly, elders, older. I prefer elders at this point. And the generation that we're talking about specifically are the baby boomers. And baby boomers extend from about, 1945, I'm sorry, to about 1965. But we're going to make an alteration to that as far as this study is concerned, because there's some issues that come up regarding social economic status and class. Okay, my other thing is not working, so I have to go over here. All right, so the purpose of this study is African American elders. So as a subset of the larger majority, And as being a member of the African American community, thought it would be interesting to look at African Americans and how music is involved in culture and society. And so there are many, many reasons for this where music is involved. And we're going to just delve into that towards the end during the literature review. That's Calvin and Glenna Sebron, by the way. So the research questions are as follows. What does being a singer and singing mean to this population? What does singing mean? 2, why did they stop singing? Number 3, how did they deal with singing? And number 4, what is their view on stopping singing? You know, how do they manage it? How do they feel about it? And those are some actually simple but complex questions when you start talking to people about the reasons that they have stopped singing. And so we're going to look at this through a lens, a tripartite lens. But let's talk about the penalty for inaction. If singing can promote better quality of life, that's what QOL stands for. Better QOL can promote better health and well-being. Better health can improve longevity. So it would be a benefit to the underserved and understudied group who oftentimes do not have access to healthcare or good healthcare. And the inaction of looking into this and investigating this would mean a loss of benefit. So as far as a literature review is concerned, there are 3 parts to this, and it may seem disjunct, but hopefully we can narrow it down so we can connect the lines. First, there's geriatric studies, then there's participatory art, and then African Americans and music making. So when we speak about geriatric studies, it all comes under the title of gerontology. So gerontology is the study of aging, all the systems, sociological, psychological, physiological, et cetera. And under that category comes geriatric voice pedagogy. So this is a study of the aging voice. What does that mean? It means a lot of things. It talks about the physical change, it can talk about the emotional changes, and we'll touch on that as we go a little further. So I want to talk about also the demographics of this study, the first part, and also the stages of aging. So that's not working again, so let me just flip it there. All right, for the larger population, elders in America, total elders in America, in 2030, it will be 20% of the US population. And by 2050, it will be estimated at 88.5 million. So this is taken from the CDC and WHO, the World Health Organization. So that's quite a number of people. And as we know, people in this age set, is another word you might use, require care, healthcare, et cetera. So anything that we can do to help ease that, to make it, to delay those changes that come with aging would be helpful. And so we're finding that that's a function of music at this point. So again, we're looking at a smaller subset, African American elders, and trending at 9 to 10% of the US elder population. By 2030, 6.1 million. By 2050, 8.9 million. And there are some considerations that we would like to look at in terms of how these people work, live, and exist in a society that sometimes has some financial and economic difficulties. So the life expanse for the average American is about 78.9 years. The life expectancy for an African American is 76.1. So if we could extend that at all, that would be helpful. And the projected longevity and age range, eventually, as people get older, there is decline in terms of the differences because, of course, the people that are older, sick or die and drop out of the count. But in general, elders are living longer. And so the question always comes to how can their quality of life be improved? And the other question that's apparent for and important to us is is there a place for voice pedagogy and all of that? So I want to talk briefly about the stages of aging. So I don't know how many of you have the stereotype of an older person and they're walking along with a cane and they're slow and they're shaking. And we see this in films a lot. And we see this on television. And for those of you that watch TikTok videos, you'll see that as well. But actually, baby boomers are defying that stereotype. And so because of that, baby boomers are demanding care, demanding activities, demanding resources. And let's face it, as one of the largest population bubbles, they've earned it. Yeah. So one of the things that we want to talk about is how we define elderly. Now, Levine defines elderly in 3 stages: young old, middle old, and old old. And we're going to really delve into that when I get to the section on African Americans. But there's also something known as your chronological age versus your biological age. Your chronological age is the age of the years that you've been on the planet. Your biological age is affected by certain conditions. Let's say you smoke, or you are obese, or you have inflammation or diabetes. All of that changes your biological age. And so it's been found, especially for African Americans, that the biological age for people that have some of these conditions is much worse than their chronological age. So let's say they might be 40, but they may have a biological age of 50. And this also depends on the type of work you do. If you live in for instance, a corridor where there's a lot of environmental pollution, or there's water problems, as in Flint, Michigan, then that can affect your biological age and your health. Now, Weiss and Laslett talk about something, the third age, and this is a little more positive actually, that the third age is when you turn about 65, that age of retirement, and then you go into the third age. And this is where you get to recreate yourself, be creative, try new things, try new projects, explore. And I have friends now that are going traveling and going all kinds of places and writing poetry and just really enjoying themselves in this third age. So we can partake of that as well, as we're looking at these stages of aging, not just from a negative viewpoint, but also from a positive viewpoint. Quality of life. So quality of life is a feeling of well-being, health. Things that affect your quality of life may be nutrition, housing, if you have safe housing, physical activity. If you're stuck in the house all day, whether it's because of a disability or you might have depression and you don't go out, that can eventually affect your physical health. Social engagement is important, family support, being out with friends, socializing, as well as socioeconomic status. Now, I'd like to put an asterisk by that, because socioeconomic status does not necessarily determine a negative quality of life. Considerations for African Americans. I think I said this before, the mean income for African American families is less than $50,000 a year. And so that carries a lot of implications with it in terms of access to healthcare, being able to pay for these kinds of things. We will remember that one of the major causes of bankruptcy in the United States is medical bills. But there's also something called weathering. This doesn't just apply to African Americans, it applies to people who, say, work in occupations that are really hard, like construction or hard labor, or they're standing for most of the time. That's different from, say, working in an office, and that can age you. And so these are some considerations that when we're speaking to people about what they do, we have to take this into consideration in terms of aging of the whole body system. Also, quality of life is affected by the physical changes to the voice. Anyone ever heard an old sounding voice? It's just shaky. Well, sometimes that's due to physical changes, such as a stroke, hormonal issues, such as thyroid, and you can have an old sounding voice, speaking and singing. And so those are some of the causes, but some of the social effect is people may talk over a person, they may be ignored, they may be dismissed because of their voice. And so some of the studies have addressed this, and in ways that they can rehabilitate someone's speaking voice as well as singing voice. The other thing we want to talk about in terms of quality of life is resilience and aging. That a negative event, death, divorce, illness, accident, someone can rebound from that. They can rebound from adversity, and that's called resilience. There's an adaptive process that they go through where they can manage it and learn to live with it or overcome it. You don't necessarily return to the status that you were before, but they have found that resilience in aging is a strong factor for longevity. The next section in the literature review is a participatory art. And participatory art covers many, many segments. Of course, I put music at the center: art, drama, writing, creative writing, expressive writing, dance, and of course, music. There are different types of research on this topic. You have qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods, and I'll tell you the differences in just a moment. But just basically, quantitative is something that you can measure. You're comparing and finding correlations. Qualitative is you're finding opinions, themes, and means by which you can understand why something happens. Mixed methods would be the two together. And the studies that I have found that were specific to participatory art and QOL dealt with the physical changes of the body, changes in the voice, changes in speaking and singing. Now, did I define participatory art? Let me go back. Participatory art means participating. That's a difference between receptive art, we call RA, where you sit in an audience and you enjoy a concert or a performance. Participatory art means you're on your feet, or you're in the choir, or you are at a party and everyone's singing, and it can be informal or formal. However, it's different from being in an audience, going to a museum, looking at paintings. If you go to a museum, you would paint. If you go to a concert, you would sing. So you're participating. And so they have found that music as participatory art is the most commonly studied. That's Matarazzo and Torino. And it's considered the most democratic. So that's a plus for us. It often serves a social function, gatherings. You can, if you've ever been to a football game and you hear people chanting and whatnot, that's kind of like participatory art. And then this final term I'd like to introduce to you, which before we go to the African-American cultural section, is this term called musicking. Musicking. And this comes from a man named Small and also Floyd, actually, who discussed this. Musicking is a term from ethnomusicology, and it talks about the communal making of music. So participatory art. But the communal making of music, sometimes it serves a purpose as in ritual, sometimes it's just for fun or entertainment, but everyone is involved from the youngest to the oldest. They do something. So if you've ever seen an African drummers, you may have a little kid just holding a bell and tapping away. And they'll have the older people who are the master musicians and they're keeping the timeline and keeping the drums going. That is musicking. It's also musicking when, what is that song? Before I Let You Go, when people start singing at picnics in the summertime, that's also musicking. So participatory art, quality of life, music and singing. They have found that participatory art can have a positive effect. Music making has a positive effect on quality of life. Group singing has a positive effect on quality of life. But again, there's need for further research. And the researchers are really deep into this now in terms of psychology, musicology, taking physical measurements in terms of testing for stress and taking cortisol and hormone level measurements. It's really fascinating. All right. And there we have, which we're going to talk a little bit more about that, singing and the body's response. So when we sing, there are two things that can happen. You can have a psychological experience or a physical experience. When we say psychological, I am not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, so these are just some general thoughts. Under psychological, emotions. Have you ever been singing or heard a song and you cried or you laughed? It could also do stress reduction. Sometimes if you are worried and you sing to yourself, It can help to reduce your stress, and it also helps with well-being. Sometimes we just feel better when we've had a song. In the physical realm, researchers have actually tested for items like cortisol, hemoglobin levels. The lower cortisol, the better it is for you. Cortisol is a stress marker. So they've done tests on these, and it's very fascinating work. But my research project is not about that. So one final thing in terms of participatory art. Older singers and choral singing. There are challenges and potential benefits. It can slow physical decline. Why is that? You're getting out, you're moving around, you're interacting with people. It promotes emotional health. It's good to have someplace to go at least once a week or twice a week. And from that, you have social engagement in groups. You probably just don't go to rehearsal. You probably do other things as well. Go to lunch, go to dinner, have coffee. There are some practical considerations though. So for instance, if you're an older person, or if you are a choir director in particular, make accommodations for the people, the older people in your organization. They may have hearing issues. They may have sight issues. If you have music, they may need bigger print. They may not be able to stand as long as some of the other people. And they may need breaks periodically to take care of personal needs. So those are just some considerations, but the payoff, I believe, is really wonderful because of the intergenerational interaction and also the social engagement. So African Americans in music making, there are 3 points we want to make here: cultural differences, music traditions, and musicking. Now, when we look at African Americans, especially this generation, if we go back 100 years, so now is 2023, so if we go back to like 1920, you will see that some of the major music genres of American music have come out of the African American music experience. And here's a chart by Dr. Portia Maltsby, who I communicated with her. I've never met her, but when I first saw this, I was just gobsmacked. It's just wonderful. So if we look here, let me get the little laser. Okay, so let's say 1920, and we do this line down this way, all right? This green line is our sacred traditions. So from here, we have the slave folk songs, spirituals, et cetera, the quartets, the rural gospel, arranged solo spirituals, about 1910 or so. 1920, we start getting into gospel quartets, freedom songs, which we have heard during the civil rights movement, contemporary gospel, which is very big, urban gospel, and holy hip hop, which is something that I discovered a few years ago. On this purple line, we have secular traditions, and coming down from 1920, we see that everything that's happening today, hip hop, rock, R&B, disco, house, and techno, comes out of this tradition. And then of course, in the secular traditions of jazz, we have the new form jazz globalism. Jazz is worldwide, as is hip hop and rock. So I just found that fascinating as well. And also another argument for working with this group. Now I have to confess, I'm off of my notes, so I am freestyling at the moment, but I'll do the best that I can. When you're working with this group, you have to think about the historic community. And one of these things is cultural competency. Now in cultural competency, it does not mean that you have to immerse yourself or be part of that group, but you do have to honor and respect the history, the background, and the knowledge that the people carry with them. In singing, there are cultural remnants that go all the way back to, according to Legge and Robinson, they already go back to African styles of singing. There are some remnants there. And there are people that are African-American pedagogues, although they're not well known. Some of the most recent ones, Janet Williams has written a book entitled Nail That Audition. Randy Jones has written a extensive book on African-American spirituals. Eugene Simpson, who is deceased at this a couple of years ago, wrote a book exclusively about the music of, I'm going to say William Grant Still, but it isn't William Grant Still. It'll come to me in just a moment. And then we have people like Sylvia Lee, who was a great voice coach, wrote a pamphlet on singing. And one of the earliest writers on voice teaching and pedagogy was Azalea Hackley. And actually her book is available at the Library of Congress if you're interested in seeing it. So the other thing that's important about this group is the church. And I put that in quotes because it's an important institution, not just because of religion, but because of music making, which is non-commercial, participatory art. It's avocational. There are people that are not professionals and professionals. And this happens at least once a week on Sundays. If you're Seventh-day Adventist, on Saturdays. But the music making is very real and people are very devoted. So that's another reason to look at this group, to see how we can help them, singers who are, let's see, I'm gonna get rid of that. Singers who are involved in making music or have been involved in making music, and they want to get back into doing this. So methodology. Methodology is tough. That means, how did you do it? So you had to set up a protocol, write a research proposal, get it approved, and then put it into action. And one thing I want to say, I want to thank my committee for helping me through that process. It was very difficult, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. So I had a research proposal. It was approved by the Institutional Review Board, number 989. And it was an exploratory qualitative comparative study. So basically, we're just easing into seeing what these questions might, what kind of answers these questions might get, and then use it as a qualitative study. We did interviews and then spoke to the participants, minimum of twice, most of them three interviews, at least 90 minutes. And then just kind of compared and contrasted what their answers were and their experiences. Now I just lost that, okay. All right, so the first thing to do in this methodology was outreach. Once the research proposal was approved, got a flyer, went on social media, even purchased ads. But the thing is, the research proposal was approved in February of 2020. And we had the pandemic in March of 2020. So that put a damper on things because, confession, I'm one of these people. I am a baby boomer. So it was difficult, and I can talk about that later if you like. As a screening, once the outreach made contact, people were instructed to go to a link where they could take a survey. And the survey that I used was the Aging Voice Index, which indicates, based on your score, some quality of life issue with you because of your voice. And this is from Eder. Then we obtained consent, had to always obtain consent, and then enrolled participants. The inclusion criteria, so the exclusion is the opposite of this, self-identified as African American. They have stopped singing. They were elders. And now I will explain to you about Levine. Here on the screen, you see young, old, middle old, and old, old. In the census, elderly starts at 65. But when we go back and look at that chart where the music was happening, I thought it was important that we include people that were somewhat younger. And it was very interesting. Also, depending on, again, the occupations that these people may be involved in, they actually may be physically older than they are chronologically. And based on Levine's rationale, it seemed a good thing to do. And I'm very happy that we did. I can show you in just a moment the participants that were actually eventually enrolled. But continuing the methodology, we had a series of interviews, transcriptions. The interviews were done via Zoom. The transcriptions were done mechanically and manually because the software did not necessarily pick up the accents and inflection of the voices. So I had to go through each interview and make sure that the transcriptions are correct. The data analysis was manual, although I did use in vivo software, again, because of language and because of cultural differences. And then with member checking in October 2022, everything was sent out. The transcripts were sent out to the individual participants for them to review and see if they had any comments or thoughts or corrections. So the results. These are my participants. F stands for female, M stands for male. And 1, 2, 3, that's the young, old, middle, old, and old, old. You will see that the M3 is missing. That was the elusive unicorn in this study. Although I spoke with several people who were very interesting and interested, but they declined to participate. One cited the time, another one said that his daughter was making him move in with her because he was about 92 or 95, if I recall. But very interesting conversations. You will note on the right-hand side of the screen, their AVI scores, 33.9, greater or equal to, indicated they had mild to moderate quality of life issues because of their voice. And this is one of the reasons that they were enrolled. So Janine, and these are all pseudonyms, Janine was age 53 at the time. Her score was 55/92. Ruth was 65. Maddie was 102, and she is now 103. And her score actually was lower than the other two ladies. Calvin was at 44, and Angela was at 44. So when we did the analysis and looking at all of the transcripts and reading over and whatnot, we came out with 3 main themes: the meaning of singing, cessation, and looking to the future. And under meaning, you had physical, emotional, and spiritual experiences in terms of what music meant to them. And I just have a few short quotes because we're running out of time. Let me hurry. So under the meaning of singing, Ruth said, it's my whole body being involved and feeling good and optimum in terms of health and wholeness. Maddie said, nothing in comparison to the feeling that I get emotionally from singing. Now, I just want to show you this. When Ruth is talking about feeling, she's talking about the physical sensations. That was my understanding of it. When Maddie was talking about feelings, she was talking about the emotions. And so again, for discussion, that may have warranted some follow-up, some very strong follow-up, but the flow of the conversation was just so interesting. We'll talk about that later. All right, and so Janine said, I go there to feel connected to who I think I really am, identity, and who God created me to be. And that's a very strong spiritual connection to the action and the meaning of singing. Now, when it came to cessation, this was very hard. There were multiple factors. And I said temperament, health, and external factors. And actually, instead of temperament, I think I should have put disenchantment, perhaps. And I'll explain that in just a moment. So Janine went to an audition. And at that audition, the auditor, the person conducting the audition, was rolling their eyes and heaving and saying, oh, I've heard that aria before. Don't you have something else? And she was very demoralized by this. Now, this was a culmination of things over time. But she said regarding that, I can't keep doing this to my insides. My heart, my emotion, my mind, I can't keep this up. And so I finally threw in the towel. Now, Ruth, on the other hand, had a lot of challenges, including having cancer. And she developed a sulcus, which is a groove on the vocal fold. And so that, in addition to being menopausal, caused her to have some issues. And even her accompanist would say, what's the matter with your voice? As a singer, when anyone says something that to you, it can cause a lot of emotional reaction, believe me. And then Calvin had a different kind of experience. At the time of our initial interview, he was recovering from an accident where he had a head injury. But before that, things had kind of tapered off in terms of his career, and he was teaching in the classroom. And in the process of stopping a fight, ended up having a head injury and going to the hospital, which a cascade of issues, had issues with his jaw and mobility. But he says, when I was in a hospital, in that emergency room, I just wanted to see if I still had a voice, which is really incredible. Then looking to the future, I asked them, and perhaps it was a very simple question, if you had 3 wishes, what would you like to do in the future? And some answers were complicated, some were very education oriented, Janine said she'd like to have an active singing career again. But she said that she would probably change her FOC. In other words, she was a soprano, changed to mezzo. And she wanted to be singing actively somewhere. And as she says at the end of this quote, after I get that voice right, though. Ruth was looking for medical intervention and was going to a health clinic and start working again. And Calvin said, there's no more fear, no more fear. Now, my other participants as well expressed desires to continue singing or working on projects. Angelo wants to start a music festival, and kind of like a Renaissance man, is learning how to play instruments and whatnot. So these are people that have not given up on singing or being involved in music at all. So discussion. In answer to the research questions, what does being a singer and singing mean to this population? What does it mean? Well, there was a deep, deep interest and connection to family, school, and study, their college experiences, their community, and their sense of mission when it came to singing. Especially like with Maddie, even as a teenager, she was going with a friend to churches and to institutions to give small concerts. And she said, we should have asked to get paid, but we never got paid. That was kind of funny. The second question, what were the factors for cessation? As I said before, temperament, I would say disenchantment, health, and external factors. So accident. Let me back up just a little bit with Angelo. He was what one would call a high-level avocational singer, but the community that he was involved with just kind of started to pull away from him because of some social issues. And I don't feel comfortable actually discussing that in open forum. But anyway, I think that we have to look at all of these things when we're asking people about their lives and when they are communicating with us, that we also be respectful of their privacy in a way. Third question, how did they deal with cessation, counseling, going to get medical care? These people were very proactive. They weren't accepting and they weren't sitting down to wait or be sad, maybe for a while be sad, but they had plans to get started again and reconnecting with their community, especially Angelo. He actually reached out to a community to start working and being involved in music. The others, not so much. So what was their view on cessation? It's not permanent. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from this. Cessation is not permanent. They would seek means to return to singing. They would accommodate, as Janine said, she would change her FOC, physical vocal changes. Calvin reported that his voice was higher. This is something that happens with men. Your average fundamental frequency gets higher. And he said, well, I was a baritone and maybe I'm a tenor now. And as he said, there is no fear, no fear. And some expressed a wish to resume study when they were able. There's always a financial barrier to that, especially depending on which area of the country you live in. And then others had alternate altruistic activities that they wanted to do, education, as I said before, starting a festival. So the main takeaways are singing is a way of life. Cessation is not permanent. Everyone hopes to sing again and they have a desire to study. And this is the point of entry for voice pedagogues. I want to talk briefly now about the limitations. Because of the pandemic, point number 4 on there, everything happened under the umbrella of the pandemic. So enrollment was delayed. If someone did not have, it was hard to access people who did not have access to social media or electronic equipment such as computers or cell phones with recording possibilities. I think a more diverse participant pool would be helpful to a study such as this. I had 2 people from the Northeast, my F1 and my F3. My F2 was from the Midwest, my M1 was from the Midwest, and my M2 was from the South. So considering the fact that over half of African Americans live in the South, the largest population being in Texas, that might be a good place to look to do some work like this. Also, I was totally prepared to go face to face and have face to face meetings with people. So remote had some issues. Number one, connectivity. Number two, people that were not familiar with or did not have the equipment, so they were not able to, even after they say did the screening, to really commit to the time and the space to do a series of interviews. And I also think being in person, that one-on-one kind of relationship cannot be overstated when you're dealing with this population, because you're also getting past issues of trust. You can sit and have a cup of coffee, you can chat for a little while, more so than through a screen as we're doing now. Bias. I would say there was some interviewer influence bias. Part of the reason is my previous life career as a professional singer was known. That may have caused, I feel, that may have caused some of the participants to modify the answers to their questions, maybe in the sense of being positive about returning to singing. I'm not sure, there's no way to prove it. I just have a feeling that maybe with more time, maybe some more pointed questions, it might have helped better. I think that we needed to have people that were more on the avocational side and amateur. That does not mean that they're not musicians. And also some people who have formal education versus amateurs, rank amateurs, people who don't read music, they sing by ear and things like that. And again, as I mentioned before, the regional differences. You might have a different outcome if you were dealing with people from, say, Alabama or Mississippi, as opposed to someone from the Northeast. And it would be good and interesting to hear what those differences would be. So future research, we need to find a more diverse population. We need to look for amateur singers, people without music training. And this one I think is really important. We need to target choir directors, because they're the ones who will include or disclude people from their organizations because they may be having voice problems. So if there's a space that they say, oh, I can send you to Dr. Smith, or I can send you to Dr. Meyer and or Ms. Sebron, and help you work with your voice, then it will help them as well in terms of the sense of community that choirs have. And then finally, recommendations for the voice pedagogue. You should honor and respect cultural differences. And this goes both ways, actually. I remember in one of my institutions where I was teaching, I had Asian and Latino students. So I made a point of learning how to say their name correctly. In the course, include music from their culture, speak with them about what they liked, etc. You can share your knowledge. That's most important. Use the science of aging voice in your teaching. So if someone comes in and says, oh, I'm a soprano, I'm a coloratura soprano, and they can't get past a high F, well, maybe it's time to say, Miss Jones, you might want to think about singing mezzo now. But most of all, you have to have patience and give joy. So these are my references, some of my references. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Carolyn. Now we have some time for questions from the public. And if you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand either on your video or in your Zoom controls, and we'll unmute you and then let you have access to Carolyn. Are there any questions? Ms. Cohen? Oh, sorry, Ms. Gazaway. Are we having trouble with the unmuting? Let me see if I can fix that.
You have to unmute, yeah.
Yeah. I think we might be having trouble with the unmuting. Let me see if I can fix that. Just a moment. Okay, now, Ms. Gazaway, would you try to unmute yourself again now, please?
Thank you. That's much better. Thank you for allowing us to participate as the public in this defense of Ms. Sebron's dissertation. My question is this. Choir directors are very important to the older adults' ability to continue in singing. So you don't necessarily have to stop or have cessation. So with that, is there any thought to sharing this study with choir directors so that they can develop and encourage the older adult singer in having patience and joy?
That's a very interesting question. And I think choir directors would be open to it. There are certain choral organizations, but I would also say that the bulk of African-American choral directors do not necessarily belong to the National Choral Society, and that you would have to find other means to reach them. One would be like with the gospel workshop, also through the American Baptist Association, organizations like that. But I think that's a very good idea and very necessary in my opinion.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Ms. Rosenberg.
I don't have a question. I just want to thank you. This was really very informative and interesting and really important. And this is from somebody who is an audience, not a singer. And maybe there's hope for me to learn to sing too, but I doubt it. Anyway, thank you, thank you, thank you.
I think there's someone at the San Francisco Conservatory that you can find to work with. Yeah.
Ms. Sebron.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing us to participate. Thank you, Ms. Sebron, for allowing us to participate as well. I have a question. I've noticed or have, and some non-professionals, some amateurs, they may have aged, but their voices sound nothing like their age indicates. Is it a difference in physicality, perhaps, or is it because maybe they've been singing all along? Or, yes, particularly when they haven't had professional training. Is there any thought on that you might be able to?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just any thought on that you may be able to expound upon.
Yeah, I'm recalling Dr. Barbara DeMaio's work with the menopausal voice and the phrase that continual use is important. So regardless of age, if you continue singing, once you stop, your muscles can atrophy and or get flabby, so to speak. You know, if you're a runner and you stop running, what do you have to do? It takes you time to get ready back up to the level that you were before. So in terms of singing, it's the same thing. You have to have continual use. And that's a point I think that we need to drive home as well. But finding the places where you can practice, where you can work out problems in private is sometimes difficult. And that causes people to withdraw and to pull back, and sometimes ends up in them isolating. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Curtis, and then Pamela Babb.
Thank you for an excellent and very meaningful presentation. My 93-year-old karaoke singing mother has listened to every word with joy and I hope rededication. My question is, how do you find, it's an invisible group, these pedagogues and voice coaches and ENTs who work with, nobody wants to say they work with the really old. How do you find the right person to work with you?
Now, that's a very good question, and I don't have an exact answer. I do know I was just at the Voice Foundation conference in the early part of June, and there is an organization of otolaryngologists who are specializing in geriatric voice. And so I actually joined. I'll be a fly on the wall, so to speak, because I'm not a medical doctor. But I think there's advocacy now, not only because of the need, but also because of the interest. And the interest is, for instance, in the other question, how can Patti LaBelle sound the way she does at 74? How is that? I would have loved to have interviewed her, but she's an elite singer. And the other thing is, how can we help people who are professionals who are having voice issues, but also people who are just normal people that may just want to sing because it gives them happiness and joy. So you have to keep asking. I would say start with your medical doctor. If you have an ENT, ask them if there's a specialist in your area. I know that the University Medical Center in Cincinnati has a wonderful ENT department, and that might be a place to start with voice therapy or vocologists and otolaryngologists. I think Pamela Babb was next.
Hello, Carolyn, congratulations to you. This was particularly of interest to me because I've noticed prior to, singing in church, I noticed that like maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago that my voice was changing and I couldn't understand why, because when you're young, you could just sing, flip, do whatever you sing. And then all of a sudden, you're not able to do it when you get a specific age. And so, and I couldn't had issues with just singing. But then I ran into, I started studying with a teacher who was in her 70s, no, 80s. And so she gave me hope, and I'm able to sing now, or it's gotten much better for me. And it's you're right with your study. You have to continue to, you have to sing every day. I sing every day. I'm amongst the younger. I'm in the early 60s, but your voice does change, and you just have to be more aware of it. And singing means a lot to me. But thank you so much for this study. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'd just like to say, going back to what Calvin said, there's no fear, and that we have to approach this in terms of aging, in terms of the changes that our body may be going through, without fear, if we know the science behind it and some of the techniques that we can use to overcome some of those challenges. That you may not be the same person you were 20, 30 years ago, but you may be something new and different. And that's what we have to embrace.
Are there any further questions?
It looks like there was one from Robin in the chat.
Yes.
Robin, please.
Well, Carol, I have benefited from being your singing student. And one of the things that's been interesting to me in the experience is that I had, through the process of a long illness, my speaking voice had deteriorated. And I realized that as we get older, we risk not only losing the ability to sing, but even to speak and participate with our voices at all. So I'm just curious, in terms of future directions, what you think about advocacy for singing for the elderly simply as a means of maintaining health and being able to participate, and whether you came across any studies that were linking this to other dimensions of healthcare.
Yes, actually the Cohen study, which actually was 2016, started in 2001, and it was a longitudinal study, so that was over time. And they looked at participatory art in terms of drama, music, singing, etc. So with the singing and the other participants as well, they had a control group, but the participants showed that their decline was slower. They had less falls. They needed less medication. And so there is a point for advocacy through this. And it's new to me. It's also challenging to me because I am in the middle old. I think I'm in the middle old, maybe not. And the thing is that we don't want to give in to the negativity that has existed in the past about voice and about singing, because there are people such as Patti LaBelle. There was a lady at my church named Shirley, I can't remember her last name, who was from Texas actually, and she could just sing, and she was, I think, in her 80s at that point. And as I said, I want to be like her when I grow up. So there's a lot of potential and a lot of possibility if people are open to these ideas. And I think that comes from advocacy. I see Dr. Jessica Long was on the line, and she and I did a community service program in Winchester once where we had about 50 people, intergenerational, from a church. And we did we did a little voice pedagogy, we did voice exercises and games and singing. And I think that's the way to go, that we give people a safe place where they can try things out and fail if they have to, because you learn from that. You learn from what you can't do and what you keep trying, and you build that resilience back up, and you learn how to adapt.
Are there any further questions? We have time for about one more before we adjourn to the committee. Hearing none. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank
And
you.
we wish you a great evening.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and congratulations.
Just so you know, I have a standing desk, so I'm gonna start lowering it now.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording now so that we don't get your lowered standing desk.